Hey, it's Jen. Have you ever listened to one of the episodes and thought to yourself, oh, I wish I could leave a response to that, or I wish I could leave feedback or ask a question? Did you know there's actually a way to do that in Spotify now? I know, it's super cool. So if you head over to Spotify and search for Java with Jen podcast or Java with Jen Hearing God's Voice for Everyday Life, you may have to search all of it. And then you go and check out my most recent episodes. There are polls and Q&A options that you can weigh in on, and I can connect with you that way over here on this platform. I usually use Instagram to connect with you guys, but now with this feature from Spotify, it's a super cool way to engage with the content of each episode and talk to me directly. I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys. So go head over to my latest episodes on Spotify, and let's do that right now. Hi, and you're listening to Java with Jen with your host, Mischelle Samuel.
Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I'm excited for this guest that I have on the show today. She is such a sweetheart and just so full of wisdom. She's a very accomplished woman and was so kind and had me on her podcast a couple of weeks back, which just launched last week. But her name is Miss Mischelle Saunders-Gottsch. I don't know if I'm saying your last name correctly.
It's Gottsch, but you're close. You're good.
And so Miss Mischelle is the CEO and founder of Altered Stories Ministries, and she's the podcast host of Altered Stories Show. She lives in Leawood, Kansas, and is a wife to Mark, mother to her daughter Tawny, Gigi, and to Bentley Rose. She's also a writer, speaker, mentor, and consultant. She's passionate about helping women share their God stories to help other women overcome their struggles and to heal from brokenness through the healing power of Jesus. She is very accomplished professionally and has worked for some super impressive companies like Compassion International and a few others as well. She can get into that a little bit. And she's just has such a wealth of knowledge, but she has a very unique, specific story from her childhood that we're going to get into today that I think will have so much wisdom for all of you. So Mischelle, thank you for joining me.
Well, Mischelle, thank you. I appreciate the nice intro.
Absolutely. So Mischelle, you are obviously very well accomplished, and I know that underneath all of that, really it's driven by your heart to serve and to glorify the Lord and to help women. And so share a little bit of your vision behind your podcast and ministry.
I guess the vision around the podcast is actually to reach out to women all over the world to transform them through the stories that are shared on the podcast. These are faith-based stories of redemption, overcoming great adversity, and through the stories transform lives through the healing power of Jesus Christ. And so, the more women's lives that can be transformed, the better. When they are healed through Jesus Christ, they are able to move forward in the calling that he has for them in their lives. And Altered Stories Ministry, we're 2 years young, and we are just continuing to grow as we can. In the evangelistic storytelling space. In addition to the brand with the podcast, we also have a blog that we feature, and it's our hope to be able to offer storytelling services to women who want to learn how to tell their stories so they can continue to, make a difference and have a voice, whether they're, telling it in groups or they're telling it, to other podcasters or on radio, TV, however the Lord would have them to share. But we do primarily serve Christian women, but we are evangelistic.
So awesome. And now Mischelle, she's modest for what she's describing, but I mean, she has worked for some large Fortune 500 companies, and she has worked in the staffing for Compassion International, which was a common denominator for us because I'm on the speaker circuit for Compassion. And so that was just kind of fun when we learned that about each other. So Mischelle, tell us a little bit about this childhood experience that you had. I want to dive right into this because I really want to extract the wisdom from it that my listeners can benefit from. And so share really what was this experience you had as a child, and how did it take you on this journey of healing?
Yeah, well, I am a childhood cult survivor, and my mother was a born again Christian who was looking for a way to get involved with a body of Christ, a group of other Christians, and naively got herself into a situation with some other friends of being involved in a home church that the founder of the church had some very unhealthy, I guess, tendencies, and actually was a graduate of Oral Roberts University and went into ministry, but was thrown out of ministry because of his radical beliefs. But my mom, being a young baby Christian, was very naive, and I don't think she really had much discipleship. My dad at that time was not a born again Christian, and so she had really no leadership in the home, spiritual leadership, outside of what she was able to glean through, this group that she was involved with that appeared to be very family oriented and welcoming. And unfortunately, at that time, it looked all innocent. And it I grew into more controls, more oppression, more legalism. There were just a lot of unhealthy actions that transpired as the leader continued to be, in the role of being very controlling and not really staying in the Word of God per se, just, his own agenda. And unfortunately, my mom was really lacking community. My dad was in the Air Force and he was gone a lot. And she was lonely and she felt like, this was a family, and she came from a large broken family. And I think, she was looking for a way in her mind to bring her children in and serve God. And then she thought this truly was the right thing to be doing. And eventually, as cults do, there was a lot of what I would consider brainwashing that happened. And it started affecting a lot of other things in our family. And my parents essentially lost custody of my brother, and my dad had to come home from, his service in the Air Force, take emergency leave. I rebelled in, my way, and, it started going out to the media what was transpiring in the community. And a lot of all that came out. And my parents almost divorced, but thankfully my mom and dad were able to work it through, and my mom made a choice to leave. And so, there's a lot of chaos. There was a lot of instability. There was a lot of shame because there was abuse that transpired as well. There was sexual abuse in the group, and I was privy to that, and my sister. And so, there was just a lot of real unhealthy ways, and it's like you didn't know what you didn't know
Yeah.
until we were able to get out of that. My mom, was really starting to heal and understand. I think some of what she was coming out of, um, I think that, there's brokenness. There was a lot of brokenness in my life, my distortion of Christianity, of Christians, because a lot of the people that came and gravitated to this particular group were very unhealthy people. And they kind of preyed on those kinds of people. It seemed like, it was toxic, very toxic. But
So
anyway, does that help some with what I've
yes.
shared?
Yeah, it does. And I have some more questions for you, but I think it's interesting timing that we're hitting on this, because the last 2 episodes I recorded were about how to know when it's time to change church, and then how to do it right, and things to look for, things to grow through, and not to leave prematurely. So I feel like it's interesting that you even mentioned it's a home church, because I did mention in my episode the importance of being in church, because I have some friends right now who, were a little bit I don't know the right word, maybe disillusioned or hurt or offended or just really bothered by the way corporate church has been handled at their specific church in this last season around COVID and stuff. And so they pulled out of church because really their church closed down for a while. And so they kind of have been shopping for a new church, but they've really found themselves like, hey, we're the church. Why can't we just do it in homes? Which the New Testament church did a lot. But I also saw in Acts that the New Testament church both met corporately in the temple and they met in homes. And so tell me what you feel like. What role did the fact that it was small and isolated and it was not a part of a larger community, how did that protect the unhealthiness of what was happening?
Well, I think there was no accountability. There was no uh, for the leader. I mean, uh, there was no accountability and no, um, I would say, until members of the group were actually um, exposing what was transpiring and then leaving and then taking a stand and realizing, the man was, he wasn't being held accountable because the people around him that, they're all in fear of him. I mean, he was very commanding. He would ridicule, he would intimidate, he would threaten, you know, you can't leave, you're going to go to hell, um, his way or the highway. Um, there was, there was just a lot of manipulation too. So I just think that didn't set the stage for, uh, him to be held accountable. And not until it was, brought out in the public and it was written up, and people were seeing who this man was really, what he was all about.
Yeah. So let's dig into a little bit the for anyone who's ever experienced a relationship that is mentally, verbally, or spiritually abusive, it kind of it has this very subtle disorienting way of going on for quite a while before you start to wise up to what's going on. Would you say that's true?
Yes, I do think so. Because it all seems very, it's very parallel to domestic violence or being with a controlling spouse or, in a bad abusive relationship. It's all the same. It
Yeah.
seems like there's this need for control. It all seems like, it's charming and wonderful at the beginning and all those things and welcoming and wonderful. And then, once, you know, there's that mind control and that trust, then, the true colors start to come out.
Yeah. So now I know I had experienced a relationship that was verbally, emotionally, mentally abusive, maybe even spiritually to some degree, for probably about 7 years before I recognized what was going on. And it wasn't until I got, ironically, in community, I began to recognize patterns that I was like, wait, this isn't really healthy. And so it wasn't, and it felt very much like I was waking up out of a dream when I
Yes.
started to kind of awaken to the fact, like, wait, this dynamic is not normal. And so what would you say are some red flags or indicators that people can recognize? Because I feel like there's this dynamic people will experience. They want to recognize the red flags before they get pulled into anything dangerous, but we also don't want to nurture a suspicious, fearful approach that can't handle people's humanity when they just make mistakes. You know what I mean? So what's the difference between someone who's operating in a controlling, manipulative nature versus someone who maybe is just having a bad day?
I think you have to look at how they are treating their own family. This man was about 30 years older than his wife. There were a lot of red flags. I mean, the fact there's isolation, people want you to be isolated, withdrawn. That's not a good thing. They're not transparent. Those things,
Yeah.
all those are factors that you can see. And then also way they treat others. He wanted everyone to treat him in a certain way too. The dissension, he caused a lot of dissension in families. It's kind of the attitude, my way or the highway,
Yeah.
and ridicule. All of those things are not what Jesus Christ represents to us. Just the authoritarian is authoritarian, not collaboration, not loving, all those things.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like one thing that I watch for too in leaders that are healthy is the openness to feedback, and which in essence feedback is a type of accountability. But I feel like healthy leaders are open to feedback and not threatened by it.
Yes,
I would.
absolutely. People operate out of control and they don't really understand anything else. It's truly underlying fear is what it is.
Yeah, it is. So then moving forward, when your mom finally got out, and that was due to people speaking up and kind of exposing what was going on, how did well, let's start with this first question. What impact did that experience have on your personal journey with Jesus? Because going through traumatic things like that, especially with someone who even for a time represents Jesus to us, can really disorient our ability to connect with Jesus again, right? And so how did
Yes.
it impact your relationship with Jesus?
Well, there was no trust. I mean, I didn't have any trust in who Jesus was. And I had a whole different perspective of what I thought who Jesus was. And I ran very far away from, the whole Christianity, just Christianity in itself. It took me a long time before I really began to trust other Christians and other faith-based leaders. And my relationship with Jesus it was really broken because I didn't see Jesus as being loving. I saw him as, you got to do this, or, you're not loved, or you have to, do all these legalism things, all these things that are, I equate to legalism, not freedom, not grace. I did go back to church with my mom after she was away for years, and we went into more of a healthier church, a denomination. And, I would say that there were really great people the Lord brought in my life, loving, godly people. I just wasn't very trusting of the whole Christian faith concept and understanding. Took me through the older years of my life, God using people to come alongside me and to show me who he was, my understanding through Bible study, and to really begin to see this was not what Jesus intended. It really was very freeing when I was able to begin to share my story. And I was very careful about who I shared it with, how I shared it. I had a lot of shame over what I went through. I was very concerned about, because I was very successful. I achieved, God was very gracious, successful. What I mean by that is in my work, in my studies, God just opened the doors of favor and blessing for me. But I was dealing with a lot of this area of, anxiousness and, all those things, fear and, control, needing to control, and lack of trust in relationships and things that I did not work through. And I had to work through those things. He was able to work through the testimony of my story, which led me to where I am now in leading a nonprofit ministry and a podcast where I help women share their stories of overcoming great adversity, trauma, difficult things.
Talk then through briefly, I think sometimes when we go through experiences that relationships of any kind that become traumatizing, or even not relationships, but even just experiences like a sickness or a car accident or losing a child or anything like that, anytime there's a strong trauma, I feel like it has the potential and can injure our relationship with the Lord, because somewhere, somehow we expected God to protect us from it or to be involved in a different way than what we experienced, right? And so sometimes it'll break that trust, or at least that's what I experienced. I had to work through not trusting the Lord fully, where when I had been much younger, that was never a struggle for me. I trusted the Lord completely, wholeheartely. And that's part of how I wandered into dangerous relationships, because I made a lot of assumptions about where God's hand would be because, of this, that, or the other. And so I had to work through broken trust. And I've heard in my experience as a pastor, I've heard many people, when they're working through those emotions of healing that trust with the Lord, they then carry some shame, feeling like, oh, I'm not having faith. I'm not being a good Christian because I am doubting God. But I think they're neglecting the reality that your relationship with God is a real relationship, that when it gets wounded, it has to be healed. And that's not an anti-spiritual reality. That's just part of having an actual real relationship. So how did you process the areas of broken trust in your relationship with God, and not feeling like you were just a deficient Christian to have to grow through those?
Generally, I've always had a very honest relationship with the Lord. I was saved when I was 5. I've seen visions. The Lord gives me visions. He ministers to me in all types of ways. I've been angry with God. I've walked away from God. I've told God he sucked. I mean, I've done all kind. I mean, I was angry. Yes, I was very angry at God. I walked away from my faith probably from the time I was 16 years old up until I was 29, to where I said, screw this. I'm God. I'm going to set my own path. I don't need this crap.
Right.
I don't need these people. These are a bunch of weak people. You know what I'm saying? So there was a whole lot of things that I had to process and come through in my relationship with Jesus, and really understanding more of who he was and what he intended, and how we are broken creatures, and how people fail us, and how through humanity, and people, even we fall down as saints, we get back up. I mean,
Yeah, well, and I feel like it's important what you just said about how you always live very honestly with the Lord, because I think a lot of times when people feel like they can't ask why, or they can't wrestle through those feelings, it's because they feel like maybe they have a picture of God as being this pious God that's not very understanding. But I have found that times in my quiet times when I would approach the Lord from a pious, religious, good girl place, but I wasn't being honest about where my heart actually was. I couldn't experience the presence of God until I just got ugly honest. And I pulled all the pretenses down, and I was, not cussing necessarily, but just kind of really gut level ugly honest. And that's when I felt the presence of the Lord come into my quiet time, because he was actually dealing with the truth of me at that point. And I feel like that's what the Lord wants. We don't want that with friends or relationships. We don't want a pretense. We want a real, authentic relationship. And I think that comes from the heart of God,
It does. And it strengthens I think that shows that we have a trust in God, in being able to be real. And I guess that's the other thing, that when I could be real with God about my feelings and my emotions, that is when the healing started to transpire too. So all of those things. And, the enemy had a plan. He wanted me to, walk away. He knew my call. He knew what my future state was going to be. He didn't want me to succeed, because, he had a plan. Like he has a plan for you. He has a plan for everyone listening on this today, and we just have to realize God, no matter what, is with us and for us. He is for us.
So what would you say, after having walked through all of this, what would you say are some principles as you walk through your healing? I'm sure that wisdom principles came to the surface that began to be able to be compasses or guidelines that could help you walk in wisdom, but they weren't necessarily like defense mechanisms, but they were wisdom principles. What would you say are some of those that you could share with our listeners that they could take into their difficult situations?
We have to learn that everyone goes through hard things, and we can't exist in that. We have to move forward. Work through the emotions, get the healing that you need. But in order to be able to move ahead, you have to learn to forgive. And people, people will come across your path that may not always have your best interest, and you got to learn to set boundaries where you have control, or where you have the ability to. You have to be able to learn to set your own personal boundaries. And that's hard. That's hard to do for a lot of people. But also, you have been given choices and freedoms, and everything is a choice where you can have a choice, be accountable for making that choice, and don't be the victim. You can't be the victim of things that transpire and happen to you, because bad things happen to good people. Bad things happen, and to walk forward, use it for good, turn it for good, where you're broken, and where God is healed, use that as an opportunity to really make a difference or help others. And I think all those things sparred me and helped me. Don't stay in your story. It's a story, and you work through it, but you can't stay in it. You need to move ahead. Your story isn't over. God has a plan and a purpose and all those things. And do take time to heal. You've got to take time, go through the process, make sure that you do those things. Every day is a new day, and we're given a new day.
Yeah, I can totally understand that phraseology that you just used. And I feel like one thing that I noticed as I walked through my healing, people would say to me, and this goes to something that you just said about don't stay in your story, is that I noticed that people would recognize that I was going through healing because I didn't talk about the wounds and the hurt as much as I had when I was digging through the nitty-gritty of it. And
yes.
And there's a time and a season for having to just get hands dirty, dig through your heart, dig through the stuff, and lots of journaling, lots of praying, lots of counseling, lots of books,
yes.
there's a season for all of that. But you're right. Like, as you walk through that healing, there comes a point where you can't stay in your story. You have to let it become a story of victory and how God used it for your good, because God will use everything for our good if we don't stay a victim.
Yes, he does. And that's why, and he also tells us to go out and tell others of the work he's done in our lives. And, that's gives the others encouragement, who are going through it. And, it's easy to get into a pity party when you're going through really, really hard things, and you're right. As you pointed out, people will talk and talk and talk about the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And, that is when they're in the healing process or they're trying to work through it. So I had to recognize that too. When you're going through the healing process, you may not make the best of choices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so understand that some things still transpire when you're not completely healed. It is a benefit to take the time that you need to get the help that you need through all the people God's going to bring across your path when you're going through the struggles.
So I like to leave my listeners with some really practical, even step-by-steps at the end to be able to tangibly apply what they learn from the episode. So if someone was listening and they were like, man, based on some of the stuff she described, I think I might be in an unhealthy relationship, or I might have a relationship that's toxic, abusive, manipulative, whatever. If they're the light bulbs are coming on for them, what would you say are the important steps they need to go through to both deal with the relationship and take care of themselves and get healthy? What would be some simple, practical steps they need to take?
First and foremost, it is getting on their knees before God and asking him for the strength to carry you through, to do what you need to do, to be able to get out of your circumstances and situation. So you need to, whoever it is in your life, really trust for that discernment and the person, one person, so you're not alone and isolated by yourself. Let them know what you're doing and what you're trying to do, and ask them to pray with you on a regular basis. Contact outside counsel. And if you're a woman, make sure it's a woman. If you're a man, make sure it's a man. The very sensitive information or sensitive circumstances that you're going through too. Your resources that you can listen to podcasts or whatever it is that you have to do to keep your mind healthy, be positive about your decision making, all of those things. Keep yourself in a positive place. Music going, keep praise and worship music going around you. All the spiritual battle too. Some of you may be fighting in that space. So it's warfare, and you've got to be equipped. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah. I think if I was to add anything to that, I know for me, when I was going through getting from the relationships that were toxic and abusive, I spent a lot of time in prayer, but I didn't know how to address the relationship. And then I reached out for help, and help was not provided. Like I didn't have the money for a counselor, and so I couldn't get counseling. And then I reached out to my pastors, and they were like, oh, we don't really want to get our hands dirty with it because of the complications of the situation. And so they weren't really helpful. And so I found that I remained in this unhealthy relationship because what it came down to is I didn't know how to draw boundaries that were going to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like one really vital, at least it was for me, and it seems to be for most people, when you're in an abusive relationship, it's because there are not boundaries that should be there. And, because boundaries are the lines that we draw so I can safely love you and safely love me at the same time, right? And so I had to recognize, I had to kind of like program myself with that reality. Like I get to draw lines to love myself. And when I started realizing I have permission to say, if you treat me this way, this is the line I'm going to draw, and where it put the responsibility of their behavior back on them and not on me anymore. And so I feel like boundaries would be the other really practical thing that I would encourage people to do if they're trying to get free from a relationship, because you can't necessarily heal in the same environment where you're being abused. You have to get out from that environment in some way, even if it just means you change the dynamics of the relationship in some measure.
Yes, I agree, Jenna Lee. And I was in an abusive relationship after I was still in rebellion. I hadn't really fully healed from the wound of my background and fell into some very bad, unhealthy relationships. And I got into an unhealthy marriage. There is, Henry McLeod has some really good books on boundary setting, and I read all of them. But I too had to learn how to set my boundaries in the marriage that I came out of. That was,
and then, diving deep. I would say the next step would be diving deep in that healing process. And just, I found that healing can happen quickly when it's really, really intentional. I think depending on how much attention and time we put into processing our thoughts, processing our heart, processing our feelings and everything, we can, have a quicker healing process. Inevitably, it still takes time, but it can take years or it can take months, depending on how much.
right. Yes, and how much you're willing to, like you said, invest in it. So, something.
I think what I'm extracting from all of this for my listeners is, firstly, you need to make sure that you have a healthy prayer life, because the Lord, His grace will help you walk through these things, but then the Holy Spirit can give you wisdom and guidance how to handle situations. Secondly, would be reach out for support. You have to have support. If you are in an unhealthy relationship and you need change, you need out, you need help, you have to have support. If that's a counselor, a pastor, a parent, a friend, you need support of some kind. And boundaries, you need to identify where boundaries need to be drawn and realize that it's going to take some strength and self-control on your part to implement and stand by your boundaries, because typically people who are abusive are boundary breakers.
Yes,
they don't
absolutely. They're very bullies. They can be bullies.
Yeah, they can be, but it's the most empowering thing, and it's a key to your healing, because it puts the control of your life back in your and God's hands, and it's so empowering. And so
people run away. And if there's anything I encourage you, don't do that. Be intentional about what it is that you're doing, because it has its effects in other areas. Like for me, making poor choices in relationships and self-esteem, and taking longer to be able to do what God has really wanted me to do and called me to do in my life. Calling to help women heal and help be healthy. I could have done that a long time ago if I would have worked at it in a different way, right? Did it sooner rather than later, because then I wasn't making some unhealthy choices. So, but God is good and His timing is today. So here I am, and I'm sharing this with you.
Yes, exactly.
And your listeners.
Yeah, and my listeners. So Mischelle, thank you so much for sharing your story. I know that of us, if we've lived longer than 12 we've experienced some things, and for you it was even less than that, and so anyone that's lived for a significant period of time, we will have gone through some kind of trauma or difficult relationship or whatever, and we all can benefit. And if not for each of you that's listening, maybe for a friend that you have that maybe you see red flags that they're in a relationship that maybe they need your support to get out of an unhealthy situation. And so my prayer is that the principles that you brought out in here and your testimony of how God stepped in and rescued you and healed you and is now using your story to bring healing to others. There's a passage in Corinthians that says, all glory to God who comforts us so that we can comfort others with the comfort we've received from Him. And I just love that, because that's exactly how God works. He comforts us, and then we're able to turn and give that to others. And so thank you for sharing your story with me and my listeners. And for those of you who are listening, if you find yourself in a situation that you feel like, I think I need help, but I don't know where to start, you can always reach out to either me or Miss Mischelle.
Yep.
Mischelle, how could they get a hold of you?
Well, they can go to www.alteredstories.org and they can reach out to me there. Everything is on our website, our whole ministry. You can write comments to us. There's our blogs to listen, read, and all of our podcasts, including the latest one with Jenna Lee, because I interviewed her. So yes, best way to get a hold of me.
Awesome. Awesome. So I would encourage you either reach out to Miss Mischelle that way through her website, or you guys could message me. You could send me a DM on Instagram. And also, if you guys are looking for something else, another resource, I did have an episode maybe about 8 or 10 episodes ago on boundaries specifically. So if that was a word that kind of perked your interest and you'd like to dig in a little bit more, go catch that episode as well. But otherwise, you guys, thank you for listening to this episode. And Mischelle, thank you for your time and for coming on here. We always have such a great time visiting.
We do. It's wonderful. Thank you for having me, Jenna Lee. It's been a blast.
Absolutely. You guys, and make sure if you appreciated this episode or it spoke to you or you feel like you know someone who could benefit from it, feel free to pass it along, share it, because I have so many stories of people who caught an episode and it really was life impacting. So please do that. It's another way of spreading the ministry that these podcasts provide. And so, Mischelle, you have a wonderful day. And to my listeners, you guys have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Donates 10% of her sales to Altered Stories Ministry and Beauty Counter. They're very clean, green products. And I have a routine that I use, and it has just made such a huge difference. They're counter time facial products on my skin, in my age group. I mean, I use a vitamin C serum that goes on my face after I wake up in the morning, and there's, this routine that I do in addition, and then I do what I do at night and it just, to me, my skin glows. Feels so healthy. I mean, a lot of people can't believe I'm the age I am because of the way my skin is. And, I just think, God wants us to take care of ourselves,
That's awesome. Beauty Counter. Yeah, I've heard a little bit about Beauty Counter. It's very clean and it's kind of I wouldn't call it trendy, but it is popular right now as far as like people who are looking for clean makeup options. That's really awesome. I know, you know what I love? I love how the Lord really does care about this stuff, because just a number of months ago, my eyelashes were getting really short again and I couldn't figure out why. And it was kind of a combination of things. I was deficient in some important vitamins. And so the Lord kind of like gave me the intuition about the vitamins I needed to be taking. And so I started taking them. And then I was telling the Lord, my eyelashes are so short, but I don't want to spend $150 on an expensive serum. Would you help me out? And then that day, a friend sent me a voice memo and she was like, hey, I started using this. It made me think of you. It's been amazing for my eyelashes. And so I got it and my eyelashes started growing in. And so I was just like, the Lord is so kind. He even cares about my freaking eyelashes.
He does. We do serve a personal God, and he does care about our skin, and he does. He knows.
So Beauty Counter for the win, for clean and anti-aging and just taking care.
Yes, ma'am. Anti-aging. I use their glow oil. My husband uses some of their product and for men. They have product for babies and kids, and they have a whole product line. And what's so cool is, for those that want to support Altered Stories Ministry, they can purchase from Lynn, and then she gives 10% of her sales to Altered Stories Ministry. So it's always good.
How would they find Lynn? Is there a specific link?
Yeah, there's Lynn Clark. She's a consultant, but they could just go out and find her. LYN is her first name, and then Clark, CLARK. And she's a consultant, so you can find her if you want to shop with Lynn Clark.
Okay, perfect. Awesome.
But they have to say, supporting Altered Stories Ministry. That's what they need to do.
I love that. I love that she does that. That's so great. Well, thank you.
Yeah, she's been doing that.
That's so cool. I love it. What a great way to support a ministry. Well, thank you for sharing that life hack. I know that a lot of my listeners are going to love that one.
I hope so. It could be kind of pricey, but they do have some sales. They do have good sales. And when they have those good sales, boy, you just jump in. Their makeup wipes are phenomenal too.
Nice. Okay. Well, you guys, you heard it from her. Beauty Counter, Lynn Clark. Go check them out. And that's your life hack for this week. Thanks, Mischelle.
Okay, Jenny.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's show. For those of you who've rated or shared this podcast on social media, thank you. Reading your comments and reviews always means so much to me. Listen, let's stay connected. Come follow me on Instagram at Java with Jen, where you can follow the latest and say hey. It's a really great way to stay in touch. Many of you have also asked how you can support the show. You can make donations through the Anchor app or on Patreon, or of course by sharing, rating, and reviewing on social media and iTunes as well. Thank you to each of you for your ongoing support. Your heartfelt feedback always reminds me why I do this. Until next time, remember, you've got this, and God's got you.